It's my big pleasure to moderate the first session today at the IRP Forum 2024 with the title Understanding the Barriers in Resilient Recovery. Since the Sendai framework was adopted in 2015, resilient recovery and building back better have been international policy concerns, particularly as natural hazards are becoming more frequent and stronger with human-induced climate change. Countries around the world are forced to deal with more and stronger challenges in this regard. To de-risk and be better prepared for their impact, we have to turn disasters into opportunities to rebuild more resilient, more sustainable, more prosperous communities through the recovery process. But as we can see all around the world, a resilient recovery has been a difficult task. And at the midpoint of the Sendai framework, progress with priority 4, building back better, has been lagging behind globally. There are many reasons for that, and Paul was just elaborating on the points, but I want to point out the uniqueness of every recovery context. There is no copy-paste solution that we can apply. Further, resilience is defined differently, and recovering communities have different priorities for recovery. Communities experience disaster impacts differently worldwide, but all strive to bounce back from the disasters and encounter significant challenges to build back better, because recovery is an extremely complex, multi-sectoral and long-term process. Recovering communities often find themselves under-resourced, and this means in the number of people helping in recovery, the skills available in recovery, or the financial resources, but they're also very often underprepared with the systems and the policies that need to be in place for a good recovery. Recovery usually happens under extreme time and resource pressure to deliver the results very quickly. And in the long run, communities have to deliver outcomes while their partners, in many cases financial partners, their interest fades away with time. So in today's session, we have representatives from a variety of countries with recent experience in planning and implementing recovery from large-scale disasters. We are here to learn from their experience, to understand and unpack the challenges they faced with the recovery, how they prioritized those challenges, to be able to realistically address and improve, and those challenges that, when they're addressed, will have a strong positive impact on the recovery outcomes. This approach will allow us to better understand where focus, effort, and support can lead to substantial improvements, and that quickly. But before we get going, please allow me to share a few housekeeping rules for our session today. The session will last for 75 minutes, and we have audience here in the room and online. And of course, questions and comments are very welcome. I want to outline the QR code of the WebEx. It was mentioned. It's on the 3rd page of the program that you received. And of course, in the audience, please also raise your hands if you want to comment or have a question. So with this, I would like to introduce our panel members here. Starting here next to me, Mr. Osama Ibrahim Muhammad, Chief Engineer of the Ministry of Environment in Iraq. Good morning.
Good morning.
Then we have next to him Ms. Zorana, International Relations Officer, Sector for Emergency Management of the Ministry of Interior of the Republic of Serbia. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Then we have Mr. Robert Ernesta, Director General, Disaster Risk Management Division, Seychelles.
Good morning.
And we have Mr. Dave Gawn, Chief Executive, National Emergency Management Agency of New Zealand.
Kia ora te whānau.
Good morning. And we have Mr. Charles Kalemba, Commissioner, Department of Disaster Management Affairs of Malawi. Good morning.
Good morning.
So let's start with our first question that I would like to address to all 5 of you. In 1 minute, can you tell us what does resilient recovery mean to you and your country? So maybe I can start with you.
Yeah. Good morning. Thank you for hosting, and I hope to be a beloved guest of yours. Resilient recovery benefit from our past experiences or the experiences of countries that have been exhausted disaster to improve plans and preparation for disaster while providing the necessary resources and developing early warning system.
Thank you very much. Then Zorana, can I pass the microphone to you?
Microphone. Okay. I will tell you what does resilient recovery means to me and my country. Sector for Emergency Management is a relatively young service established in 2009 as a coordinating body in disaster risk reduction, DRR. In 2012, we formed a national platform for DRR to reduce disaster risk in Serbia, bringing together relevant state institutions. Substantial changes in thinking occurred in 2014 with the adoption of preparedness and response approaches, marking a departure from decades-old practices through legislation. The approach to prevention and recovery also changed, especially through the amendment of 2009 law. In 2018, a new law on disaster risk reduction was enacted, introducing the principle of Build Back Better. By embracing these principles, Serbia shifted its focus towards prevention, addressing areas that were previously overlooked. All efforts undertaken for resilient recovery in the Republic of Serbia are based on a Build Back Better principle to avoid repeating past mistakes.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Robert, can I hand over to you?
Yeah. To us, it means it is the ability for affected citizens and communities to access resources to effectively recover from a disaster, leading to a process of enhanced preparedness for future disasters. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Dave, over to you.
Thank you. I like how short that was, Robert. Resilient recovery for New Zealand means enabling, empowering and supporting community resilience by closely integrating the 4 Rs: risk reduction, readiness, response and recovery during the pre-disaster and post-disaster phases. As Objective 17 of our National Disaster Resilience Strategy states, New Zealand aims to embed a strategic resilience approach to recovery planning that takes account of the risks identified, recognises long-term priorities and opportunities to build back better, and ensures the needs of the affected are at the centre of the recovery processes. To best support communities, it is imperative that recovery planning starts in risk reduction so that the benefits of science can practically be applied to improve recovery outcomes, increasing resilience to future events. This practice continues into readiness and response and is operationalised during the recovery phases. Lessons are captured to inform future risk reduction measures and strategic system thinking. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dave. And Charles, can I call on you?
Yeah, thank you. Resilient recovery for Malawi. We are looking at a process of being able to learn from the disaster that has happened, come up with systems and build back infrastructure and community capacity to be able to have minimal or no impact if you are hit again with the same disaster or a disaster of higher magnitude, that the systems and the economy is able to still move on regardless of what disasters come in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if I may quickly summarize, what we can see in every country, it's really mainstreamed in the policies of the country, and a big focus is really put on community empowerment and enabling community to really make sure that life as usual can continue. That is the key for the future on the long term. Thank you very much, everybody, for your intervention. Now I would like to address a question to three of you. First, thinking about recent disaster events in your country, can you share some of the barriers that you have faced to attain resilient recovery? Maybe first to our colleague from Iraq.
Okay. Our country was exposed to the disaster of drought and water scarcity due to climate change, especially in the marshes of southern Iraq, as it is the fifth most crispness country to climate change, lack of rainfall, and lack of water release from neighboring countries. The goals I was trying to achieve a recovering and rebuilding better are the return of the local population to the marshes of southern Iraq, because these areas are important areas listed on the World Heritage List and have a beautiful nature, and their local people work raising buffalo, farming, fishing, and because the loss of this profession leads to the need, the resilient to work in the city, environmental displacement, and the impact on the food security in the country. The biggest challenges I faced in achieving my goals are the continuation lack of rainfall due to climate change, the construction of dams by neighboring countries on shared rivers, and the reduction of Iraqis' share of water. Number 3, weak resource available to disaster workers to recover from this long-time disaster. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was extremely interesting. Zorana, can I ask you the same question?
Of course. And the disasters in May 2014 exposed vulnerabilities within the Republic of Serbia system. Consequently, in December 2014, the government approved a National Disaster Risk Management Program and Action Plan for 2017-2020 period. The comprehensive program outlined a framework for protection against natural disaster, coordination, financial management related to disaster risk reduction and management. Currently, the government is in the process of formulating a new action plan and national disaster risk reduction strategy, as the previous one has expired. Based on the lessons learned from 2014 floods, there's a consensus on the necessity to streamline procedures for receiving international humanitarian aid. Additionally, there is a call to broaden the scope to entities legally obligated to participate in rescue and care activities, all while adhering to prescribed procedures for dealing with emergency situations.
Great, thank you very much. And Robert, give us an example from Seychelles, please.
From the outset, I'm from a country that is not sort of disaster prone. And the events of the 7th of December, where we had extreme rainfall, which was basically a record, and a lot of landslides. In fact, we had 2 disaster events concurrently. And the second was the explosion of an explosive depot. So the challenges were many because we basically never had an experience prior to learn from. And there was this general sort of a panic situation, panic mode. And it took quite a while for people to have their wits about them and start dealing with the situation. So the challenges are many. We have sort of the time is limited, and as a country sort of wholly dependent on imports, and we have one whole industrial estate down. So the main challenge would be to sort of maintain the standards, building standards, and to get the equipment in country. We also have the challenge of information management, where there's a lack of data that has been consistently kept and collated over time. We had no sort of recovery management in place. We sort of we're still in the process of learning how to cope with the international institutions that want to sort of bring in help to us. We do not have the necessary legislation for that. And generally, the country is only now coming to the realization that we need to have a sort of a central agency at the political level to take care of the situation. So in terms of disaster risk management, Seychelles is still a toddler. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just summarizing from what I heard, of course, disasters can be too much water, too little water, and the lack of data to really be able to respond to the disasters and also the equipment. But I also want to outline from Iraq an important finding was really the importance of green infrastructure that is not just important for disaster prevention, but also for biodiversity conservation, for the long-term resilience of the people. I think that was a beautiful example. Thank you very much. Well, now I have a question for our two other panelists. Reflecting on your experiences, what are some recovery challenges that you see that can jeopardize all developmental growth that your country has gained? Maybe first to New Zealand.
Thank you. One of the biggest recovery challenges for New Zealand is getting the balance right between the cost of recovery versus the cost of adaptation. Although New Zealand is one of the best insured countries in the world, in fact about 92% penetration, the cost of natural hazards is growing faster than our economy. Today, approximately 80% of the country in New Zealand is in active recovery. The Auckland anniversary floods and the Cyclone Gabrielle, which hit the northern and eastern parts of the North Island in January 2023, were the second and third most costly insurance events in our history, only behind the Christchurch earthquakes in 2010-11. Unlike the Canterbury earthquakes, Cyclone Gabrielle also directly impacted New Zealand's primary and export sectors, with an initial on-farm revenue loss estimated between $500 million and $1 billion. Crop losses, as opposed to damage to property, cannot usually be insured against. A significant share of the damage caused by Cyclone Gabrielle was to roading and river or flood stop banks. As a result, an outsized share of the cost to rebuild infrastructure will fall on central and local government to cover rather than the private insurers. Just a little bit of context. New Zealand, according to Lloyd's, is the second most exposed country to national hazards in the world. And we spend an estimated 4.3% of GDP each year over the past 2 decades recovering from their impacts. This is almost as much as we spend on education, superannuation, or health services. The full scale of damage, trauma, and expense of these events is why natural hazards are rightly considered a nationally significant risk. Over the past 20 years, there have been $44 billion in insurance and earthquake commission payouts for natural disasters. However, research suggests that the wider economic cost over the same period from uninsured physical damage, recovery costs, and economic disruption is multiples higher. It can be estimated that circa $120 billion, with the long-term social costs from social, health, and education outcomes, and a further circa $40 billion mainly paid for by central and local governments, which gives an estimated cost over the last couple of decades of around $200 billion. And that is challenging for a country of our size. Our development choices in medium and high-risk locations place more of our built environment in harm's way. Councils and communities are considering the full range of adaptation options for areas under threat under the Power Framework, protecting assets from risks, accommodating risks, retreating from risk, or avoiding risk. Affected communities now face difficult choices about whether and how to rebuild. Councils will often offer to buy homes in places where future risks cannot be managed. For those who choose to accept the offer, this starts the retreat process. Some places at risk are large and highly populated, and the challenges and costs to adaptation will be significant. Communities exposed to the highest risks, such as those near major rivers and the coast, face particular challenges. Rural communities, where large amounts of land are used for business, and low-income communities will be particularly vulnerable. Maori will also be disproportionately impacted. Culturally significant sites will be threatened, as will the industries that many Maori are employed in and have assets. Maori have high levels of hardship already, and many Hapori Maori live in areas at risk from flooding and sea level rise. Arigato.
Thank you very much, Dave. Charles, can I ask you to elaborate on the situation in Malawi?
Yeah, thank you very much. To start with, Malawi is an agro-based economy, and the climatic shocks impact directly on the economy. Just to give a background, we have been recently being hit by cyclones, which is a new phenomenon for our region. Mostly we would have been talking of minor flooding and drought. But this time around, from 2015, we had the cyclone Kenneth that hit the country, and 2019, cyclone Idai, 2022, two cyclones, Anna and Gombe, and last year, 2023, we were hit by the biggest cyclone for us ever. That's Cyclone Freddy. And the problem that we are facing is that from 2015, all the cyclones that have hit us, we have not been really recovering. The reason, the economy is small and not doing very well. And as also stated by New Zealand, the recovery costs are more than the developmental needs of the country. And you may not even have the resources to recover. So you have, like in a boxing ring, where you are hit and you are down, and before you can stand up, you are hit again. And you try to struggle to rise up, you are hit again. I think the last thing is you may die there and not come back to the fight. So 2015 we were hit, we didn't recover. 2019 we are hit. We started the slow progress in terms of programming recovery after Idai. We are still currently implementing recovery from Idai. Then you are hit in 2022 by two cyclones, Gombe and Anna. We didn't even do a recovery plan for that one. Then we are hit in 2023, heavily so. And we quickly did a recovery planning. So I will, based on that background, to what I'm going to point out here as issues. Issue number one is even in the recovery programming, we are looking at what was destroyed. So housing was destroyed. The roads were destroyed. And you continue to count those things. But we are not looking at what made the roads to be destroyed, the housing to be destroyed, which is the environment. You have degraded the environment. Now, if you want to recover by building back the roads, building back the houses, building back the infrastructure, without looking at the environment, then certainly another cyclone coming, it will also destroy what you have built back. So from that background, as a country, we have moved to restructure our thinking. One, in the legal framework. The past legal framework for 1991 for disaster management focused on response. We have a new law that we put in place very fast in 2023 to move away from focusing on a response and look at recovery and resilience. So build up a legal system that is talking about resilience. One, being able to make sure that, firstly, people do not stay in areas where they are exposed. That will assist us to reduce the impact of disasters on people's lives and also on people's amenities. We have also restructured the policy framework. We have a new policy framework that is also speaking to the legal framework. And we have also restructured the department itself that manages disasters. From a department that is a fire engine, waiting for things to happen and start running, to a department that will be able to advise all ministries on what issues they should take into account if a disaster would hit us. We have also relooked at our structure in terms of coordination structure, because that's another issue that we have seen, that different departments operate as if they are independent of each other, and when it comes to disasters, they would say, no, it's the responsibility of the Disaster Management Affairs Department. But it's not. It's a responsibility of everybody. It's a responsibility of the health ministry. The work for the disaster management department is just to coordinate the activities and be able to flash out where people need to do what at what time. And if we are hit, be able to mobilize and organize the response, but also be able to refocus to say, I will give a practical example. One time, we went to UNDP and we said, can you assist us? And UNDP says, no, we are developmental. We are not in disaster management. Go and ask the colleagues who are doing that. But we cannot separate development and disasters now. The way things are. We have to make sure that we take disaster into development. So when you are doing developmental activities, make sure that you are having behind your mind a system that will respond to disasters. So we have to take this to all the ministries and make sure that we are mainstreaming this. But not only nationally, internationally. Malawi is a landlocked country. We have Tanzania, Mozambique, Zambia surrounding us. Now, there are certain things that happen in Malawi that will affect Mozambique. Certain things that happen in Mozambique that will affect Malawi. So we also need to put together the coordination mechanism in this regard. The other issue is the programming itself. As I said, we are in 2023, and we have been hit by Gombe, Ana, and Frede. We are programming with the partners, development partners, on IDAI 2019. I don't think the speed at which climatic changes are happening would require us to be that slow in terms of programming. If you ask World Bank, they will tell you, no, we are an elephant. We don't just turn around like a rabbit. But you see, with the climatic changes that we are having, we need to change that type of thinking. Maybe the World Bank needs to become a rabbit. If you go to the UN, the flash appeals, they will say, no, flash appeals are for response. They're not, but the period between response, early recovery, and recovery, they are seamless. You cannot say today we have closed the response and we are starting early recovery, and then the next day we are starting recovery. No, they are seamless. And therefore, our programming in terms of recovery, response, and early recovery must be such a way that you can refocus resources immediately. And therefore, the headquarters of donors, nations, we need to start to rethink the way we are programming when it comes to recovery. As I said, Malawi, we are failing to recover because the speed at which we are making decisions as a country, but also with our international partners, is not the speed at which climatic changes are happening. So I would stop there for now. We have been hit and hit and hit again, and we are failing to wake up, and we may die.
Thank you very much, Charles, for this elaboration. That really deserves an applause. Thank you. And it was very interesting to hear from you and from Dave from New Zealand, a very economically well-developed country, big land size, small population, and from Malawi, a country that is still in economic development, that it doesn't really matter how much money a country has. Events are coming in higher frequency, in stronger impact, and the costs remain the same, and the focus really needs to be on building back a resilient community so that the future impacts cannot harm the community that strong. So with this, let's go to the next round of questions that goes again to all 5 of you. In reflecting on your experience and those of your colleagues in this panel, which of these challenges do you view as having a high positive impact on future recovery efforts in your country, and why? Charles, if I can ask you to keep it short so we're not running out of time, but I would like to ask you first.
Can you come back, the question?
Sure. Reflecting on your experience and those of your colleagues in this panel, which of these challenges do you view as having a high positive impact on future recovery efforts in your country, and why?
Yeah, I think the first is to build issues of recovery into recovery and resilience into the development platform. To make sure that when we are talking development, we are also talking recovery, we are also talking resilience. Just as yesterday we had a topic on pre-recovery planning. I think that will be a game changer where, be it nationals or donors, we focus together to see our communities and our nations resilient, taking into account the fact that disasters will still come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. Dave, can I ask you next?
Yeah, sure. Just rechecking the question. Hey, look, I endorse what Charles has said in particular. You know, the cumulative effects of cascading and concurrent events, as it's affecting Malawi, is affecting us as well, particularly the exacerbation by climate change. And that in turn presents opportunities. You know, for the first time, New Zealand's minister and the appointment of a minister is not just the Minister of Emergency Management, but the Minister of Emergency Management and Recovery. And as a concept, that is starting to gain real traction in New Zealand and a focus. So it's been elevated, whereas in the past it has always been framed around response. Another positive impact on the future recovery efforts in New Zealand is the development of a national disaster loss database. Critical data sets sourced from enduring recovery can then be used to identify future risks and leveraged in terms of financing, in terms of managing the pre-disaster recovery efforts that actually need to be certainly to the fore within New Zealand in terms of the climate that we have and the climate that we work within. Ultimately, communities, which is where the heart is, will benefit by experiencing faster and more coordinated recoveries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. Robert, can I ask you next?
It has been highlighted that disaster management needs to be part of a development issue. So for Seychelles, it would be beneficial for disaster risk management to be integrated into national planning so that ministries, departments, and agencies would sort of incorporate disaster risk management within their various strategic plans and budget for that. That will basically lead to all ministries and departments to have their business continuity plans and to adapt to the changing environment. Basically, in Seychelles, it is basically the climate change adaptation into national planning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Zorana.
Okay. All recovery process in the Republic of Serbia are coordinated within the government. The Serbian government issues all projects based on Build Back Better. Future cooperation should involve closer collaboration with local municipalities. Effective communication among local self-government is crucial for Serbia. And also learning from examples of good practice or bad experience from one another's. We have such examples in all phases, both prevention and response, and building better resilience to disaster. We cannot defeat the nature, but we can improve our efforts and be better in the next situation that will surely happen. And if we act smarter, we will have less consequences in terms of lost human lives and destroys infrastructure.
Thank you, Zorana. And Osama, over to you.
I think climate change is a constant danger. If countries commit implementing their duties towards climate change, the resulting disasters and the resulting losses and damage will be reduced.
Thank you very much. So briefly summarizing, everybody really focuses on mainstreaming climate change and building resilience into national policies, as this is the only way not to react to disasters and put too much effort into the recovery, but really help build resilience so that there is less need for recovery and quicker recovery can happen. But now let me put one more question to all of you here on the panel. What do you see as the role of the IRP and international development partners in supporting you and other member states in addressing these challenges that you have identified? Let's start again with Charles.
Yeah. Number one is to start to lobby for faster programming, to make sure that we are able to cope and catch up. We may not necessarily do that, but we still need to, with the climatic speed. That's the first issue. We really need to reprogram our thinking, reprogram the way we do things, reprogram the way we make decisions in the headquarters, be it headquarters for international organizations or nations, number one. Number two is to consolidate best practices and share those best practices. Things that have worked, not the many talk shows that we have, but real things that have worked in certain countries. We know a country like Japan, it's hit so many times, but very resilient, sort of. Those best practices are very important for some of us who are just joining the bandwagon of being hit and hit and hit again. We are never being hit before. So we need those best practices, and we can be assisted by having a consolidation of exactly what is happening where and what can we do to get those to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dave.
Always after Charles. Agree entirely, Charles. IRP, I'd never even heard of it until I've only been in the business a couple of years, until I was invited to this forum. There's no excuses for that, but certainly the IRP is, as Charles said, the opportunity to create that knowledge bank, that subject matter expertise, where we all learn from each other. And even New Zealand as a developed country doesn't have the resources or the size or the time or the people to actually get to where we need to be without the likes of the IRP. And I'm really interested in some of the discussion that was had yesterday around some of the knowledge banks that you actually have and how we can leverage that. From a New Zealand perspective, we're currently building a national recovery operating model and considering how best to determine consistent thresholds in relation to scale and severity of recoveries, how to develop a single framework of recovery indicators to assess the impacts of events and understand the extent that these could be tied to central government funding and arrangements, and to utilise an organisation like our IRP and what they have already learned is something that we will be leaning into. And we'd like to leverage off any work that the IRP and the international development partners and member states have done in this pre-disaster recovery planning space. And certainly it's something I intend to take up with the IRP. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Dave. Robert.
Yeah, basically it's the technical assistance to improve recovery preparedness, a platform to build capacity to address post-disaster challenges, a learning platform for best practices, and also a platform from which the coordination of international assistance can be accessed. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Robert. And Zorana, from your point of view?
The Republic of Serbia closely collaborates with the UNDR office since 2012. Serbia is actively participating and closely collaborated with the DRR office in Europe. One noteworthy collaboration in Serbia participation in the Make City Resilient, My City is Getting Ready campaign. Serbia was one of the first countries to embrace and process data in the disaster loss database, with a significant number of local self-government participating in a campaign. Close cooperation also exists in the field of risk register with UN colleagues. That's my answer.
Thank you very much, Zorana. And lastly?
I see. At this conference, the observation and results that will be presented during the session will be recorded, and this will help to obtain international funding from donors and help countries that need support. In addition to possibility of coordination between representatives of countries and international partners to provide the required support.
Thank you very much. So if I may summarize from the last question, I think we all really unisono agree that it is knowledge sharing, collecting of knowledge, collecting of experiences, and sharing. And I think that's what the IRP already does. And we call on the IRP to actually do more of this very invaluable sharing of experiences. And with sharing of experiences, we're also developing skills, capacities of people, but in general, it's capacity development and technical assistance, and especially the good coordination of these that is needed to be able to recover stronger and better out of disasters. Thanks very much, panel members. Please stay here because we are opening now for a question and answer. Please, here in the room, feel free to raise your hand for if you have any questions or if you have any comment. And I have a couple of comments on the screen, but let me look in the audience first. I don't see any hands coming up. Then I would suggest that I start with the first question here on the screen. I have one question for Zorana.
Yes.
According to UNDRR report, SME accounts for 33.6% of Serbia's GDP, and at the same time, 40 to 60% of them go out of business following a disaster. How is your department, ministry addressing this in your recovery process?
How is sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
According to UNDRR reports,
Yeah.
SMEs account for 33.6% of Serbia's GDP, and at the same time, 40 to 60% of them go out of business following a disaster. How is your department or ministry addressing this in your recovery process?
In our recovery process, when it comes to that, we are going for recovery and to. It depends. I don't know how to answer it.
Depends on the context.
Yeah. Depends on what is. I didn't understand very much the question. Wait.
Well, maybe we can take this question offline afterwards.
Okay, please do.
Then I'm looking in the room if there is a question in the room. Maybe let's take one from the room. Over to you, Hassan, in the first row, if we can have the microphone.
Yeah.
Or Hassan, sorry.
Okay.
Microphone was in the back, it's okay. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Dimba Enyama. I'm the Charge Embassy of Nigeria in Tokyo. Brilliant presentations, we have listened. But I'm concerned, taking from the comments or experience rendered here by Mr. Charles Kalemba. And my question will precisely be directed at Mr. Ronald Jackson at the UNDP office. I would want to draw from the bitter scenarios painted by Mr. Charles and to ask, how can international cooperation and support be effectively mobilized to aid in the recovery efforts and ensure the long-term resilience of not only Japan in the aftermath of the recent earthquake, but other countries, given the fact, beyond theories, you cannot divorce or separate development from disaster recovery. Where there is no recovery, there can't be room for development. What would the UNDP come up with as a policy? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I take this was more a comment rather than a question, so I go to the next question on my screen, which is directed to Charles. Malawi, as you mentioned, Malawi, as you mentioned, is experiencing new disasters, and that the frequency has drastically increased. Malawi, at the same time, has recorded a government debt to GDP of 66.7% of the country's GDP in 2022, which means taking more debt, would put the country in a precarious situation, even from development banks. Given the situation at hand, how do you see Malawi addressing the cost of financing to recover?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. Yeah, those are disasters, only disasters. That's what I would say. As I said, when an economy is continuously hit, you have no space to maneuver within. So governments resort in borrowing. And to the point that the debt becomes unsustainable. That's the situation that we are in now. If you heard my president at the UN General Assembly, he was talking about debt relief. Basically, that's the issue that is there. That one, as a country, we cannot resource recovery because we don't even have for development. And sometimes you don't even have for operations because all the money that you make is used to pay debt. And with our current system, you prioritize debt payment so that you are not blacklisted. These are real issues. These are not stories. And when I'm saying we really need to find a formula together, that's what we are talking about. Yesterday, when we were doing the pre-planning, I made a comment to say, if you look at the countries that are able to do pre-planning for recovery, the examples that were given were from the developed world. Mostly. Reason, they have space to maneuver. The developing countries do not have the space to maneuver. And if we continue that direction, that's why I said you are in a ring and you are hit. Before you rise, you are hit again. And before you rise, you are hit again. The end result, you die. Actually, some countries, not only Malawi, if we were companies, would have filed for bankruptcy. Those are the situations that are there. I think that's also the question that the colleague from the embassy in Tokyo for Nigeria is talking about. That's also why I was saying we need to change the thinking even in the donor community, even in the international organizations like the UN. I think if we continue doing business as usual, we will see some countries dying. Countries have cried enough, but I think we are not doing enough to listen to that cry. And if we continue not to listen, conflicts will arise. You see, conflicts arise because of inequalities. Conflicts arise because you are not being heard. Let me stop there.
Thank you, Charles. I think it's a very serious topic that you have touched upon, and thank you for sharing your point of view and your thoughts on this. I think that's a topic that really needs to be discussed in the future. But let me ask again in the audience. Ronald, in the first row. Thank you.
Yes, just a general intervention. Just listening. First, let me congratulate the panelists. I found your interventions, quite impressive and really eye-opening on a number of issues, particularly the challenges faced, but also the efforts that are being mobilized to address some of these challenges. The comments that we've heard regarding recovery and development, I think these are very important statements, and for us at UNDP, and I think for all of us in the development community, we see recovery as a pathway to development. In fact, we refer to it as an opportunity for resetting the development pathways. So just to your appeal, we do support that reflection. And in that regard, you would note UNDP, besides and supported by a number of the UN partners, after undertaking the post-disaster needs assessment, this feeds into the design and framing of the national recovery frameworks, which forms a part of the broader efforts to mobilize resources internationally to support the redevelopment processes for many countries. This is something that UNDP has taken a leadership role on, but is also supported by a number of our UN partners in this particular endeavor. So just to the question around how the UN can support bringing additional resources to countries in that endeavor. But we appreciate that recovery is not a 6-month endeavor. It is not a 1-year endeavor. It is a multi-year endeavor. And in that regard, one of the things, speaking now individually as an institution, we have looked at internally is to really frame an internal policy around how UNDP seeks to partner with countries that it supports beyond simply the assessment and what is considered the rehabilitation or early recovery phase. What can we do additionally to accompany governments on that particular journey? And there what we've looked at is what are the sort of internal value propositions we can bring to the table, whether it's on energy, whether it's supporting in the community on environment. And here, this question about how can we be flexible? So in our development programming, how can these then be aligned to your recovery priorities that are outlined in your recovery framework? So just to say that, indeed we support your views. We've listened to calls from our member states to really try to be a consistent partner, which we are from a development perspective. Invariably, what we need to do is to now match these in times to what are the recovery requirements going forward. And we already see opportunities unfolding in Malawi, for example, on the outcome of the cyclones that have impacted you recently, where we've been working through our country offices or regional offices with the African Union to look at some of the requirements and the demands. So just want to say that we support your call, and we're already making those efforts. And to our colleague who really expressed the view on what are the sort of policy approaches that we're taking. Beyond that, then this whole question around how do we help you with the financing? Because one of the big challenges I think facing many countries who are in the throes of debt is, if recovery is a multi-year process, how are you financing that? Much of that is going to be on budget. A lot of that is going to be through debt. And how do you navigate that in an environment where you have, a debt stranglehold? So that's, again, an area where UNDP and a number of other UN partners, including UNDRR, are really now looking into this issue around creative approaches for tackling the financing of recovery going forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ronald. One more round. I had so many hands before. Yeah, maybe the gentleman here in the second row, in the front. In the front. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all the panelists for the very incisive conversations. My thinking goes to the submission by Mr. Charles Kalemba from Malawi. At the risk of repetition, I see a parallel between what is happening in Malawi and what is happening in my country, Nigeria. In Malawi, the major challenge is cyclones, as Mr. Kalemba has mentioned. In my country, Nigeria, the major challenge is the annually repetitive flood disaster. Flood is predictable, yet it is happening every year with loss of lives, destruction of means of livelihoods, human displacement. And in several fora, we have mentioned it, that this cycle of events, before you start implementing your recovery plans, you are building back better, another flood disaster, another flood season has hit. And every year, some of these local communities are becoming more vulnerable. Nigeria is a federating country. We have different states with different climate and weather conditions and with different capacities. Some states are doing very well. Some states are not doing well. And of course, it is a quagmire, just like Mr. Charles has mentioned. But I think it's worth mentioning. After the 2012 flood disaster in Nigeria, which as at that time was the most devastating in the history of the country, the then president of Nigeria invited all the leaders of the major private sector organizations for a fundraiser to support the government in the recovery process. And one night, more than 450 million USD was raised. And that money was warehoused, and a committee was set up, Presidential Committee for Flood Relief and Rehabilitation. And then, given the influence of people that head in that committee, they kept on getting funding from the private sector every year. And year in, year out, they provided tremendous support in the recovery process. Then, a second novel idea in Nigeria is that by law, legal framework, there's a predictability of disaster management, disaster recovery funding by law. Every state, every local government, agencies of government like the National Emergency Management Agency, no matter what, they have some level of predictability of funding. So in that respect, it is up to say that, yes, it is not yet Uhuru for us in Nigeria, but I think a lot of tremendous achievement has been made in respect of reconstruction and recovery. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing your experience from Nigeria. Just pointing out, you mentioned the private sector. I think we haven't mentioned the private sector and the role in disaster recovery of the private sector, so we should keep this in mind as well. I have to watch time. We're almost running out, so I'll read one last question from my screen here, and I'm requesting Dave, who will be receiving this question, to keep the answer short so that we can be on time. I'm sorry for all the questions that have not been answered, but please keep them and ask them to the panel members after the session. So, one question to Dave. Considering that with increasing climate change, a lot of places will be uninsurable, how does New Zealand plan to finance recovery and resilience?
Yeah, the recovery model in terms of funding is a combination of centrally funded and locally government funded. And for infrastructure, we use a 60-40 split. So 60% for local government infrastructure is funded centrally, and 40% is funded by the local government. It works for now. We're fortunate in that we have a reasonable GDP to debt ratio. We have very high insurance penetration, and we have an organisation called EQC. And EQC, which is the Earthquake Commission, underwrites to a degree a lot of the disaster relief and the funding that comes from it. That said, keep it very brief, that said, the point about the exacerbation and frequency and the increasing frequency of events means that in the future it's going to be difficult for New Zealand as well. And from a government policy perspective, we have to work out how we actually manage the financing of future risk. And that's a piece of work that's really just begun. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dave. Well, with this, we're actually coming to the end of the first plenary session. I just want to share with you a few points that I noted down during our very good discussion, very engaged also from the audience. Thank you very much for this. So the key messages we collected today are really the absolute need to mainstream resilience in national policies and national planning. And the key to recover quickly from disaster is also community empowerment. It's the communities where the disaster hit, and it's the communities that need to have the appropriate technical assistance, the appropriate capacities and financial means to recover quickly from a disaster. Because disasters are happening more frequently and stronger with with human-induced climate change. And unfortunately, in some countries, we also experience that the new kind of natural impacts is threatening the communities. And we also need to ensure that we leave no one behind when we're recovering from disasters. We heard about the invaluable benefits of natural infrastructure. So when building better and creating resilience, natural infrastructure can provide dual or triple benefits. And of course, also the importance of collecting data and information to help us better respond to the disasters. And with this, I go to the last point. That is really sessions like today and forums like the IRP Forum now are key to share experiences, to learn from each other. And we're all sitting in the same boat. So nobody is spared by human-induced climate change and natural disasters. And we really need to cooperate and coordinate well globally without any borders to help increase resilience worldwide and to decrease the risk of disaster impacts. And with this, I thank my panel members very much for sharing your experiences and your inputs, and also the audience for all your comments and questions. Thank you very much. Back over to you.